Dear friends, we are in our sixth conversation, and we want to continue with the book of Cardinal Sarah and Benedict XVI, From the Depths of Our Hearts. So, we are talking today about a distinction between the order and the ministry. In Latin, there is two words, officia and munera. Officia is the order of the priesthood. Munera are the works, the ministry that come from this order of the priesthood. So we have to keep that very clear in mind that there is a sacramental office, and it is at the basis of the church. Sacramental office is also all the sacraments. So there is this sacred part which is at the foundation of the church. The ordo or office is the priest, the bishop, and the deacon. These are the ordos, the three orders that are at the basic foundation of the church. Then we have a ministry. Ministry, let's say, the lector, the Eucharistic minister, the catechist. These are functions. These are jobs, works that the ordo produces, the order makes. So we have to keep that distinction very clear, because sometimes, especially in our English language, we use both the word ministry, both for the priest, deacon, and bishop, and also the lay ministry, which is lector, Eucharistic minister, and so on. So the fact that the sole enduring structural elements of the church is a sacrament means at the same time that it is always having to be constituted anew by God. So the order comes from God, and the ministries come from the order, from the bishop, the priest, and the deacon. So the church cannot dispose of it as she wishes. So the church cannot do whatever she wants with the bishop, the priest, and the deacon, because these are orders that come from God. He says that it is not just there and cannot be set up or arranged by the church out of her own resources. It comes into being only secondarily through the church's call. Primarily, it is through God's call to this particular person, and thus only charismatically, pneumatically, that means spiritually. Let me explain here. You see, look for instance the priest. First is God who calls the priest, maybe when he's young, when he's older. But then is the church who assigns the priest to a specific ministry. So you see that the priesthood, the order, comes directly from God. So the church cannot do anything she wants. For instance, if the church says, oh, I need a priest in this locale, let me take a man and make him a priest. That's not how it works. Because the priest is called by God. It's not just called by the institution of the church. Yes, then the church employs, then the church uses that man who has been called by God, prepared by God, grown and educated in a way for many years by God. So you see that the ordo is not in the hands of the church. The ordo cannot be changed or adapted or modified according to the needs of the church. So let's say, because that is how it is, because the church cannot simply of herself appoint officials, but has to wait on God's call. And this is ultimately the only reason there can be a shortage of priests. Hence, it has always been the case that this office cannot simply be created by the institutional, but has to be asked of God in prayer. You remember Jesus said many times, pray to the Lord of the harvest and send the laborers into the harvest. And remember that the shortage of priests has always been. It's always been there. Look, in the missions, there are very few priests, and the mission is still, 3/4 of the world is still in mission. So, and today, even in certain parts of the Western world, there are not enough priests. But the lack of priests is almost, I would say, natural to the church. It's almost part of the church. Imagine Jesus Christ himself. He says, pray the Lord of the harvest. Jesus could have called, instead of 12, he could have 120. And he could have spread them all over the world. No, he says, he has only 12. And then he says to pray God. So because those orders, those callings come from God, not from the church. It's not something institutional or, functional. Oh, we need 10 priests this year, so we put an application. The first 10 who are going to apply, we are going to ordain them. That's not how things work. See, here is God who is in charge of the church. So it's God who calls. Imagine the priest that we have today, he was called 14 years ago from God. Because then he goes into the seminary, he has to study so much, he has to go through preparation, and finally he's ordained, and finally the priest can assign him. So it is very important, this difference between the order and the ministry. Ministry, first of all, is temporary, because it is only for a certain period of time. And secondly, ministry is delegated. That means is receive the power from the bishop or the priest, and he can perform certain munera, certain offices, certain jobs and services to the church only temporarily. So then the cardinal continues, says, the demand for separating priesthood and celibacy ultimately rests on the idea that priesthood ought to be regarded not as a charismatic, but purely as an office that can be assigned by the institution itself. So, sometimes we lack this understanding of the priesthood because we think the priest is a job. You go there to your office, do 8 hours, you go home and you are free. No, the priest, a Catholic priest, is totally different. It is a life. You give your life, not just your job or your time. So that's why, for instance, celibacy is part of it, because you give all your life, not just your work. You give your personal life, you give your spiritual life, you give your psychologically, all your affection to God. That's the whole idea of the priesthood as a sacrament. Priesthood as originated by God himself. So from the fact that the church is not our institution, but it is the breakthrough of somewhat different, that she is in her nature iuris divini, of divine right, it follows that we cannot ever simply constitute her ourselves. That means the church, we cannot make it ourselves. Why? Because it is of divine origin. It is not just another political social institution. It's not an NGO, Pope Francis many times says. So you see that if we come down to organize ourselves and making priests here and there, organizing our offices as a corporation, then we miss the whole idea of church. The church is iuri divinis, means of right, a divine right. It means it comes from God. He is in charge. He is going to organize it. Celibacy is a rampart that enables the church to avoid the trap that would amount to understanding her as a human institution. So celibacy is also part of this. It helps us to understand that the church is not just a simple social institution. St. John Paul II wrote, priestly celibacy should not be considered just as a legal norm or as totally external condition for admission to ordination, but rather as a value that is profoundly connected with ordination, whereby a man takes on the likeness of Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd and spouse of the church. Celibacy expresses and manifests how much the church is the work of God, the Good Shepherd, and not our own church, our own institution. So you see here, celibacy, it gives the right understanding also of the church, where the church comes from and who is in charge of the church. So we have to keep that distinction between offices and offices of the order or the ministry. Even though sometimes we confuse the two words and we use ministry for everything. It must be admitted that the language becomes doubtful, confused, and hence not helpful for expressing the doctrine of the faith whenever the difference of essence and not merely of degree between the baptismal priesthood and the ordained priesthood. Now let me explain a little bit here. You know, we talk about priesthood of baptism and priesthood of ordination. The priesthood of baptism, we all have it. But it is not just smaller, but it is different in nature. This is very important to keep in mind. It's not because, you know, if I grow with my baptismal priesthood, I can become an ordained priest. No, it's totally different. It's different in nature. That's what, you know, the church tells us. And so, for instance, we cannot think about a career. For instance, if I start as a lector, then I become Eucharistic minister, then I become a deacon, then I become a priest, then I become a bishop. No, it doesn't work that way. The things are totally different because bishop and priest and deacon are called by God. The other, the lector, the Eucharistic minister, the catechist, they are delegated by these people, by the bishop actually, to do some ministries. So remember, it's not a career, because, you know, we can start slow from bottom and go up to become a bishop. No, that's not the way it works. The church is not like that. So we have to keep always that in mind. And also, the final point is the ministry is delegated. Ministry is not something that you own. For instance, if you are a Eucharistic minister for 2 years, then if the priest doesn't need you anymore, you don't do it anymore, because it is a job somehow. It's not a vocation. Oh, God called me to be a Eucharistic minister. No. God called the bishop and the priest and the deacon. Then they delegate you to help them in certain ministries. Okay? So it's not, I remember years ago, someone sued a priest because he took him off from the list of the Eucharistic ministers. He didn't understand anything about the church, because Eucharistic minister is delegated. It is a helping hand. It is a job that the priest gives you for a certain time of period of time. It's not something that comes directly from God. Good. So I think it is clear what we have today, the distinction between offices and ministry. Now there is a temptation in the church. It says, the church, if she is deprived of spiritual vocations over a long time or period, might be tempted to create for herself a substitute clergy, so to speak. So, like the Amazon, there are priests, maybe they get to certain places every year or every 2 years. Oh, okay, so let us get someone there, we ordain him, and he's going to be the priest there. That's a temptation, it says, because then we move from the church of God, which God is in charge and God is calling, to a church as an institution, a social company, a social corporation. So that's a big temptation of trying to fix the problems according to our own social institutions, social ways. And again, it says it is a big, big temptation. Now, the creation of lay ministries must therefore be considered with great caution. We must be afraid of taking God's place and organizing the church in a merely human manner. We must regain the courage to persevere in prayer for vocation. So let us close today. I think we have a pretty clear idea about the order and the ministry, the munera and the officials, the says lay ministry and the order of bishop, priest, and deacon. So take care and see you for next time. Bye bye.